All of this talk about the old independent minor leagues brings up an important and obvious question for us to ask. Why doesn't baseball have a promotion and relegation system? Or for that matter, why don't any American sports have promotion and relegation? It makes sense in theory, right? Allow all the clubs to remain independent. If the Oakland Athletics are awful one season, well, they're relegated. Bring up the best AAA minor league club to replace them. That system gives teams an incentive to not finish last and promotes fan interest in cities that don't currently have major league teams. Why? Because you could always be promoted into a major league slot. So why don't we have this in American sport? Well, I did some research and the answer really surprised me. Let's go back in time. All of us know about the National League, which was founded in 1876. Some of us also know that there was a National Association in 1871. That consisted again of professional baseball teams. But have you ever heard of the National Association of Baseball Players? This association was formed way back in 1857. It was strictly an amateur organization. It grew rapidly after the Civil War. In fact, the Civil War actually helped popularize the game of baseball around the country. But the organization didn't last long. This National Association had hundreds of member teams at one point in time. It did little to organize the sport the way that we would think of it. Even the rules used in games were left up to the discretion of the individual clubs. With the governing body doing little to organize the sport, controversies abounded. In December 1868, the National Association formally decided to differentiate between amateur and professional clubs. If you're like me, you grew up hearing about the famous Cincinnati Red Stockings of 1869. That was the first professional baseball club of all time. Actually, though, it seems that teams had been paying players under the table long before then. We know about some controversies surrounding player payments, such as this man, Lip Pike, of the Philadelphia Athletics of the early 1860s. This should sound familiar to you if you pay attention to American sports. We're going through the exact same headache right now in college football. It turns out that the cult of the amateur is usually kind of a smokescreen. If you want the best players, you've got to pay them one way or another. Eventually, a second national association was formed in 1871. That is generally regarded as the first professional baseball league. But this league had its problems as well. And here comes the important part. The problem that these leagues had was keeping teams afloat. It's the same problem that people who play draft leagues run into. If you're already so far behind that you can't win, why field a team at all? Bill James talked about this exact problem in his new historical baseball abstract, though he talked about it in different terms. James pointed out that baseball faced a huge problem if teams like the New York Yankees were able to sign cable television contracts for far more money than other teams in the league. That should sound familiar. Say the Yankees were scheduled to play against the Minnesota Twins. With a huge financial disparity between the teams, what would happen if the Twins simply refused to play? Well, it would lead to chaos. In other words, at some point in time, you need to have some amount of exclusivity to your sport. If you've got teams folding left and right due to economic issues or other problems, the integrity of the sport itself will be in question. The thing is that you and I know that almost instinctively. When we read the stories of old defunct sports leagues, for example, the old North American Soccer League, we can always tell that the end is near because teams start dropping out like flies. You need stability and some time to succeed. To deal with this problem, a group of owners formed the National League in late 1875. The National League was specifically designed to be exclusive. Okay, I need to explain something here too, and this is going to seem maybe a little bit strange to you. Back in the old days, teams were formed locally and they were independent of one another. There was no concept of a franchise until the National League came around. In the National League system, there were a limited number of franchises. Those were granted to certain owners. With that franchise came rights over a certain swath of geographic territory. So you know those frustrating television territorial rights issues? They date back to 1875. The National League stipulated that only cities with a population of over 75,000 could be included. The league also reserved the right to punish teams for misbehavior. And so, in 1876, the New York Mutuals and the Philadelphia Athletics refused to make their late-season road trips to the West. They chose instead to play local exhibition games to recoup their losses. This sort of action wasn't all that unusual in the two national associations, of course, but the National League would have none of that. Both teams were expelled. This led to no professional baseball in New York City until 1882, by the way. That's the system that we've still got today. The league has the ability to discipline teams that get out of line and tries to create economic incentives in the form of territorial monopolies. Those prevent owners from leaving once things become difficult. Okay, now let's look at association football, or soccer, in England. The Football Association was formed in 1863. This was mostly to ensure that teams played by the same rules and to establish organized competition. I've actually gotten in arguments with people about this before. Professional baseball predates professional soccer. Organized amateur baseball also predates organized amateur soccer. However, it is still true that baseball evolved from an old English game. The game came from England, but the business smarts came from America. In 1885, the Football Association reluctantly allowed professionalism. However, the Football Association was a bit stronger and better organized than baseball's old National Association. The Football Association was able to survive the start of professionalism, and it remains an important entity to this day. The Football League was formed in 1888 as an organization of professional clubs. There were 12 clubs in the first season of the Football League. Meanwhile, another organization formed consisting of clubs that were rejected when they applied for Football League membership. This organization was called the Combination, and it consisted of 10 clubs. The Combination suffered from poor organization, however, and it folded quickly. It was replaced in 1889 by the Football Alliance, which consisted of 12 teams. Once again, this should strike you as familiar. The old American Association started back in 1882 and served as a direct challenger to the National League. And as you probably already know, the forerunner of the World Series was a championship series between the winners of the American Association and the National League. That started in 1884. When you try to set up a sports league monopoly, other people tend to jump in to try to grab some of that money. As you know, the American Association folded. When it folded after the 1891 season, 4 of its teams joined the National League. Those 4 teams were on equal footing with the other National League teams. However, that's not what happened in the Football League. The Football League and the Football Alliance merged in the summer of 1892. In this new scheme, Football Alliance clubs played in the so-called Second Division, while Football League clubs played in the First Division. A system of so-called test matches at the end of the season between the worst teams in the First Division and the best teams in the Second Division theoretically helped decide which teams would move up and which teams would stay put. By 1898, this was formalized into a promotion and relegation system. And there's your difference. The American system relied on exclusivity, going as far as to dissolve 4 National League teams at the end of the 1899 season. In contrast, the Football League in England did whatever it could to merge with other existing leagues. The Football League grew over the years, usually by merging with other local leagues. You're probably wondering why. I'm not 100% sure, but I think it's got a lot to do with the nature of the Football Association itself. There were local football leagues throughout England around this time and before. Those teams also played against each other in competitions run by the Football Association, like the famous FA Cup. This made establishing territorial monopolies impossible. It also meant that the Football League was always going to have competition. And when you're dealing with competition that's always going to be there, you might as well merge. You might as well have them join you. Now, don't get me wrong, the promotion and relegation system is not perfect. For one thing, teams that do particularly well tend to be much stronger and richer than other teams in the system. The existence of continental competitions like the European Cup, which is now called the Champions League, only makes this disparity worse. That's something that you need to keep in mind. Many of us would love to see a promotion and relegation system in place to at least give teams an incentive to try to be competitive. Once you saw the Pittsburgh Pirates field losing teams for 20 straight years, it leaves a real bad taste in your mouth. However, the fact that clubs are so independent and compete in such a cutthroat manner in a promotion-relegation league, that might be worse if you're a fan of a smaller club. In other words, with a full relegation system, the Pirates might have dropped several tiers. In fact, the franchise might have gone out of business completely. The other issue is that clubs need to adhere to certain standards to be included in the league structure. In association football, it used to be that clubs had to be formally elected to make it to the next level. Some clubs would likewise be saved from relegation and certain financial hardship by attracting enough votes from their fellow owners. In other words, it hasn't always been a merit-based system. Take the Cologne Dynamos as an example. Chairman Graham White invested oodles of money in Cologne, turning them into a non-league powerhouse by the late 1980s. Cologne should have been promoted to the Football League in 1990, but they were turned down. They were turned down because their stadium was not modern enough, and they were unable to secure a sharing agreement to let them play somewhere else temporarily. Without the payoff that entering the 4th division would have given the team, White apparently had no choice but to dissolve the club entirely. And, well, that's the problem that you have in the English system. Clubs can simply disappear. It's a dog-eat-dog world out there. Anyway, after all that, I'm interested to know what you think. Do the merits of promotion and relegation outweigh the problems? Is this a system that we should try in the United States? Let me know what your thoughts are below.